Thinkest thou that hell is but a fable? I think so still, till experience change thy mind. Why, this is hell, nor are we out of it. Hell hath no limits, nor is circumscribed in one self-place. For where I am is hell, and where hell is, there must I ever be.
Oh look guys, it's Betatron, the transformer that got cut from the movies. A male feminist whose magical transformation is to have a party at his house to watch Gilmore Girls, and then all of a sudden you wake up alone in the room with him and he's stroking your inner thigh. Just the other day, I logged on to YouTube and I said to myself, man, the one thing I want to see is some male nipples. I really want to see the nipples, I want to see some chest hair, and some satisfied pasty tummy protruding in a sassy pose. This is what I said to myself, except that it never happened. There's no need to see this stuff, man. There really isn't. My friends, what's going on here? Too tough? A little too spicy here? Shouldn't we be on the same team, Oliver and I? We don't like Jordan Peterson, we're both on the left. I guess I'm on the left, but we're not on the same team. We're on very different teams over here. Things are moving in different directions. What is going on? Maybe you like Philosophy Tube. Maybe you like to beat around your balls with a coat hanger. Maybe you like airplane food. Maybe you like to sprinkle chia seeds in the hair of old people and then scream superfood into their ears and run away.
Beauty isn't all about a luscious set of lips or rock-hard abs. Your brain looks for more subtle clues that indicate whether a person is healthy. Right.
Say the word chia, and most of us immediately think of a little green pet. But we want you to think of chia for another reason. It's a whole grain that was used by the Aztecs as their main energy source.
Right.
The little green pet. The little green pet. The little green pet.
And I really want to say the following to my YouTube babies. It doesn't matter to Dad what you believe. We're not on this channel for any synchronicity of values. I never promised to you to have any ideological consistency. I never promised any value alignment. I never even promised any values. When have I promised any values, my friends? Do you remember that song, The Rolling Stone? Well, in my case, I'm just like a rolling corpse, rolling along into a ditch with the last remnants of life, and I'm not even sure why I'm here. I'm not sure who I fought for in the Civil War. I just want to be there with my other, with the corpses, with the rot, and I just want to drift away, and I hope that there's some warmth there. Somewhere between Lenin and the old order. Somewhere between the crucifixion and the Holocaust, except none of it is real to me. Just a kind of a blur, a Buddhist society in my head, growing larger and larger.
Right.
I, Lucifer, Lord of Hell and Regent of the Damned. I'm a huge fan of Jordan Peterson. In fact, I'd go so far as to say I am the only true Jordan Peterson fan in the entire world.
Now you just listen to this corny ass motherfucker. Fucking sugar tits lord of soy. He has all kinds of levels of inferno up his sleeve.
I once spent an entire Sunday in a bathtub.
This motherfucker is no fan of Professor Peterson. Does he look like the kind of a guy who can watch Pinocchio like a real man? Fix me up, old man Geppetto. Oh, I'm broken. So broken, Geppetto. So broken, Geppetto. And really feel it in the bones, feel that wood around us, in the archetypes.
And you remember in Pinocchio?
Motherfucker, you're no fan of Professor Peterson.
And where hell is, there must I ever be.
My dudes, where's this bitterness coming from? Well, it's really, I can't afford a fucking snake. I can't afford a snake. Like, I can't, no props on this channel, except for these backgrounds. I was really spending wildly when I bought this shit. No more, motherfuckers. I see you over there. Fucking your cheeks filled with red pills issued on this channel, and yet here you are, a fucking cheap cunt. Won't even give dad $1. Motherfucker won't even give dad $1. Why don't you go over to the dictionary, open to the page that has your name on it, and what are you gonna see? A turd emoji, that's what you are. That's the kind of a cheap cliche that you are. If I hit $700 a month on Patreon, my dudes, the sky's the limit. I don't like reptiles, and really need to get the bigger fucking snake from the pet store, motherfucking Oliver. Come on, dude. You're not gonna impress us with this little fucking shitty snake. We need something bigger and better. My dudes, next time I do a video about Stefan Molyneux, I'm gonna have a fucking hamster hanging onto my chest hair for his dear life. Now that's suspense. That's fucking action. That's kind of universally preferable. What is he gonna do over there? I have like ample strands to hold on to. And all of this could be possible if you just believe in giving creators money. Where's your card, dude? It's lying right there. There's a show to be had. There are all kinds of animals and there are different things we can do with them. Where there's a will, there's a way.
It is a little confusing approaching Peterson's work from the point of view of philosophy, because words like postmodernism and Marxism, relativism and nihilism have technical meanings that he tends to wind around.
Now these words have meanings. They definitely have meanings. What they don't have is technical meanings. But the fact that Peterson mangoes their meanings doesn't mean that there's anything technical there. We're not talking about a car alternator. We're not talking about any science or engineering where the word technical has any meaning whatsoever. My friends, I'm gonna summarize for you right now the field of philosophy. You don't even have to join Patreon for this shit. Alright, so there's continental philosophy, which is basically a long discourse on the post-nut syndrome, with some political implications relative to the collapse of the Soviet Union. That's basically it. And then there are a bunch of assholes who now torture us with this fucking analytical philosophy. It's just so pointless, analytical philosophy. It's just so utterly useless and pointless. Fucking a disappearance of bronies would have a bigger impact on the Western civilization than if analytic philosophy was never invented. My friends, these philosophers, these intercontinental slow-strokers, they don't even read each other's shit. They would rather have their nipples pierced repeatedly than read this other stuff that other people write. I mean, it's barely comprehensible, my dudes. This is what's up. This is what's going on. They do have a definition of postmodernism, I'm sure, but they don't have a technical definition for that shit. Like, what is the technical definition for Marxism? There were people in pre-revolutionary Russia who wanted Russia to first develop industry and then have the bourgeois class emerge, and only then, according to their scientific understanding of history, would it be appropriate to have a proletarian revolution. However, there were, of course, Grandpa Lenin, who went straight to anal. Who were the real Marxists? What is the technical definition of Marxist there? Has a Marxist government ever existed in a technical sense of the word? Because everywhere there was a little hints of some nationalism or some other bullshit. What is technical here? There's nothing technical here. I'm nitpicking, and I just need to fill some time on the camera, I guess. I mean, I'm sure this video is going to be long and tedious, but I just decided to make a note of this.
Peterson seems to use the word nihilism as interchangeable with relativism, which it isn't really, and we'll get to that. But if you follow his work, you'd be forgiven for thinking that relativism is a bad thing. The good doctor has condemned moral relativism multiple times in his lectures. He went on the Joe Rogan show to say that it was, quote, just wrong, and 12 Rules for Life contains a foreword by psychologist Norman Doidge presenting Peterson's whole career as a counter to relativism. The supposed link is that if we were all die-hard relativists and every goal was as good as every other, then we would never truly value anything. Hence, nihilism and societal collapse. And Peterson's not the only one worried about this. The philosophers Stephen Hicks and neuroscientist Sam Harris see relativism as a rejection of science and Enlightenment values. We'll come back to both of them. Former Breitbart editor Ben Shapiro has linked it with cultural decay, and in his video The Ugly Truth About Relativism, with over 90,000 views, ex-software salesman Stefan Molyneux says that relativism is part of a plot driven by a demonic thirst for power. There's also this video from Weird Male YouTube, which honestly has one of the best openings since Genesis.
So this video is going to be on, does moral relativism lead to pussy worship?
Now here on YouTube, we're definitely against pussy worship. We don't even pronounce the word pussy, like I almost didn't, because it's just such a foreign concept, pussy. You even have to be in the vicinity of pussy to really worship it, which is also not an option. I look at young honeys. Where do the young honeys look? It's at my wrists, at my thin wrists. It's like a camel would rather pass through the eye of the needle than a honey would accept me with my thin beta wrists. How unfair. How unfair. And it's interesting how in our postmodern world, to use the word postmodern in not a technical sense, it's interesting how the two anchors of reality, the two coherent things, are effectively virtue signaling and self-pity. Like, those are the things that really ground us in our identity. Everything is subjective except for that. In order for me to be validated, motherfucking psychiatry has to be there. It has to be solid. DSM-5 is the cornerstone of my bipolar reality. I gravitate around it, and I have to make that fight for medicine and for fucking science there, because this is who I am. I'm like, whoa, there's a little pony galloping away from me on the rainbow of mental health, going to the other side. Goodbye. I go on Twitter and I speak up against racism, because it's there. Everything else is subjective, but that's definitely there. I'm not racist. Therefore I am.
Peterson actually has quite an unusual stance compared to some of those others, and I'm not lumping him in with them carelessly. Down here, everyone's punishment is bespoke. But it's worth noting that some of those who claim to have the answer to nihilism do share some political themes. The question for now is, how can you confront the meaninglessness of your life without falling into nihilism and despair? You have a few options. One is to believe in God. Yeah! Another is to invent some new goals and meaning through pop psychology and recycling a lot of religion, like Jordan Peterson does, taking God's dead corpse and turning it into fertilizer.
My dude, I wish you'd take God's dead corpse and turn it into a garment and just gonna cover yourself.
Or, if magic isn't doing it for you anymore, why not try science? In 2010, neuroscientist Sam Harris responded to this alleged problem of nihilism and relativism. In his book The Moral Landscape, he claims that there are objective answers to moral questions, and that science can help humans discover them. He isn't saying that there will someday be single scientific answers to all moral questions, but he is trying to find objective values without religion.
But the demagogues are right about one thing. We need a universal conception of human values.
He thinks that people are too tolerant, and that this is a symptom of a dangerous cultural relativism, a theme he shares with Peterson, Doidge, Molyneux, Shapiro, and others. Harris thinks you should all be brave, free speech warriors and face the truth. If there are facts about morality, then doesn't it stand to reason that some people, or cultures, might know more about those facts than others?
Whenever we are talking about facts, certain opinions must be excluded. That is what it is to have a domain of expertise. How have we convinced ourselves that every culture has a point of view on these subjects worth considering.
He's particularly concerned that you are too tolerant of behaviors that he associates with religion, and conservative Islam especially, like requiring women to wear veils and honor killings. Although in fact, both of those behaviors have parallels in societies that aren't quite so influenced by conservative Islam, and arguably say more about controlling women than they do about religion.
Generally speaking, I don't like to go all new atheist, but in this instance, Contradouche kind of forces me into it. So let's get it right. Religion regulates your diet. It regulates your beard. It regulates the tiny hats that you wear or don't wear. It regulates who can and cannot grant communion. It regulates all these things and many others, including dress codes and modes of transportation. But when it comes to controlling women, it's something, arguably, that has nothing to do with religion. It fucking controls everything else. But not regulating women is just something we're gonna divorce for religion. Not because we're patronizing minorities and trying to wiggle our ass out of our male feminism for the sake of this hierarchy of victimhood. No, this is not the reason we would say something like that. It's different. You see, my friends, religion is a little bit like that guy who shows you his pointless high school athletic trophies from 20 years ago when you have the misfortune of entering his house. Religion lives in the past. It blesses the ethos of a certain era. It blesses it with magical pixie dust. And this is it. This is the golden age that we all have to go back to. It's like a holy kidney stone that we shouldn't let pass. And we look backward to that time. And in that time, people had to be told not to fuck animals under the threat of death. These are the kind of scriptures that are very important to us. And, you know, guess what? Like back in the day in the desert, women didn't have all these rights. And if this thing is calcified, if the social order is calcified and blessed by the prophet or the Messiah or whoever, well, those are the things that we try to bring into the real world in Saudi Arabia, in Iran, in other places. My friends, I happen to live in a locale, strangely enough, with a fairly large population of Muslims. And just recently, I've been at a local store and I saw a lady walking out in a full burqa. This was just the whole thing. Even the eyes were covered. You can barely see those eyes. And man, how useless this was, because this is not where I go to court young honeys. To the Kroger's? No, my friends, find me at the mall court. Over there by Annie's Pretzels. This is where I go. The burqa kind of redundant here. I'm just not in the mood. But I will have to say that I am against burqa bans, any type of bans on religious clothing that has been implemented in France and elsewhere. But I will say that the burqa is pretty ridiculous, and the hijab is just a miniature version of such. And I remember listening back in the day to the wise words of Chomsky Honk. And he was asked, you know, why do you always shit on America? And Noam Chomsky replied that this is my society. This is where I live. And so this is where I can have the most impact, and this is what I have the moral responsibility to criticize. And I agree with him 100%.
Upon Chomsky's style.
I don't spend a lot of time on this channel. I hardly spend any time on this channel fucking criticizing foreign cultures. I don't know what the fucking point of this channel even is. And this is just another topic that I could fucking procrastinate on forever and make a video once in 2 months. If I now had to even look to Wikipedia for other cultures to criticize. I personally believe that people aren't really programmed to effectively criticize other tribes, even when there is place for constructive criticism there. Eventually, whenever you see any generalizations about a large group of people, even if there are correct elements there, it usually has some sort of a foul smell to it, because there is a little bit of the foaming at the mouth that can develop there. And so for that reason, I'm not recommending that anybody dedicate their life to pointing out the real faults of Islam or Orthodox Judaism or whatever the fuck. But it's one thing to not spend your whole life criticizing a foreign religion, and it's another thing to not acknowledge its profound flaws out of virtue signaling. There's something profane about a disrobed hipster sticking out his tummy for fundamentalist Islam.
What this illustrates, though, is that for Harris, the quest to find objective value in life is not just for the fun of it. In his book The End of Faith, he explicitly discusses these issues in the context of American military intervention, racial profiling, and torture. Apropos, at the end of this talk, a man comes on stage. Who is this guy? Is this TED? Is this TED Talks? Is this Theodore T. Talks? Anyway, a man comes on stage and points out something Harris neglected to mention, that many Muslim women wear veils voluntarily.
Hey guys, you know another thing that people do voluntarily? Enroll in gay conversion therapy to kind of switch it back and go back to Becky. Why didn't you stare at her legs back in high school? Well, you didn't have enough Jesus in you. And Oliver and I, we have no problem with it because it's voluntary. And you know, the other thing great about the conversion therapy is it has nothing to do with religion. Homophobia arguably has little to do with religion.
I love the Bible. I love God's word. I believe that the law of the Lord is perfect. And, you know, Leviticus 20:13 clearly says, if a man also lie with mankind as he lieth with the woman, both of them have committed an abomination, they shall surely be put to death, their blood shall be upon them. And, you know, as a Christian, I believe the Bible, and that's where I get my belief.
And arguably say more about controlling women than they do about religion.
No homos will ever be allowed on this church as long as I'm the pastor here. Never!
And why would it have anything to do with religion when religion is really kind of passing a blunt with your third-wave feminist friends while goth chick Margaret reads a few passages from Rumi?
Can you engage in a conversation with that kind of woman without seeing kind of cultural imperialist?
Harris replies that voluntary doesn't really mean all that much in certain contexts. They might be brainwashed by their delusional belief systems.
And so I think we shouldn't be so eager to always take their word for it.
So Harris has allowed himself the possibility of saying, I know what's good for you, and I don't necessarily need to ask.
Interestingly enough, I know what's good for you and I don't even need to ask is precisely the kind of philosophy that has a lot of Muslim women wearing the hijab and the burqa today, which are mandated in Iran and Saudi Arabia and in other conservative regions of the Islamic world. Girls as young as 9 are forced to wear the hijab or one of those by their parents. And even if you do have a choice when you become an adult to not wear a hijab, what does that make you in the eyes of the family? There are a lot of clerics who have said that women who don't wear a hijab open themselves to the risk of molestation and even rape. And my friends, all of this has parallels outside of the Muslim world, of course. Of course it does. I used to be an Orthodox Christian, and there were plenty of priests who have been known to say things like, if you wear provocative outfits as a woman, you bring on rape onto yourself. I've even heard an instructor at my junior college, a conservative Christian instructor, who made the same sentiments. Of course there are parallels to it in the outside world. We just don't make excuses for them. Like if Mike Pence came out tomorrow and said that Christian women need to wear a modesty scarf on top of their head, well, one would expect that Philosophy Tube wouldn't be here to say that this has nothing to do with religion. And so, I mean, it's fine to criticize Sam Harris and the implication of what he's saying. Of course, if Oliver had a daughter, it's unlikely that he would send her on a foreign exchange trip to any conservative Muslim region where most women do wear the hijab. It's just unlikely that Oliver would do something like that, even though no hierarchy of cultures and there are no supremacy of values relative to specific issues. They don't exist. But we're just going to send that girl to Sweden is what we're going to do. And once again, of course, many Muslim women in Western countries and elsewhere wear the hijab to indicate their religious lifestyle. It's a free choice. Sometimes even their families are more liberal and they oppose it. I just realize all of those things, and I realize that it's fine to criticize the wider implications of what Sam Harris is saying, but since we're doing YouTube philosophy, it would be nice, and we're discussing this garment that women are often forced to wear, it would be nice to have a little bit of that nuance in the equation.
and it seems like he's at least open to the idea that those in possession of the moral facts can be justified in acting violently against the morally ignorant. That's the power of having objectivity on your side.
Oliver, you dumb motherfucker, do you believe in things like mandatory vaccination, or do you want to ban that shit because we don't have objectivity on our side, and see what comes after this latest measles outbreak?
Elsewhere, Harris mentions brain scans as a way of objectively knowing who's happy and who's not. But how can you tell the difference between a brain scan of somebody who's really happy, according to Harris, and somebody who's merely deluded? Well, you can't. So even though he highly values the facts, it seems like some are more valuable than others, and it's not clear on what basis he's weighing them up.
Sam Harris has clearly said that in order to gauge your true level of happiness, when you're undergoing the brain scan, Sam Harris himself has to pinch both of your nipples really hard while screaming, "Lawrence Krauss has done nothing wrong."
I have Jeffrey Dahmer's sweater.
And it's like, Ivan, what do you think about Dirty Harris? What are your opinions about Sam Harris? For me, Sam Harris is not a lifestyle. He's a guy who can be hyper-articulate, and from my point of view, once in a while, can say insightful things. However, I'm very well aware of the fact that he has endorsed tickle torture and bombing countries and racially profiling Armenians, or at least he fiddled around with these ideas. But more to the point, really I think went a little bit too balls deep into the whole thing of criticizing Muslims. I mean, he invites people like Douglas Murray. And Douglas Murray, effectively, if you take his book and add a little bit of spice to it, it could very well pass for the manifesto of the New Zealand shooter.
The civilization born of Judeo-Christian values, ancient Greek philosophy, and the discoveries of the Enlightenment is staring at the abyss brought there by its own hand. To put it starkly, Europe is committing suicide. How did this happen? It's a complicated story, but there are two major causes. The first is the mass movement of peoples into Europe.
Now, this manifesto that he posted several links to, we've been taking a look at theCUBE, and some of what it has to say is deeply distressing. He called it the Great Replacement.
This is the stuff of suicide, the self-annihilation of a culture.
And his theory maintains that Europe's white majority is being actively replaced by Northern African, Sub-Saharan African immigrants, many of whom are Muslim.
By 2017, the most popular boy's name in the United Kingdom was Mohammed.
So I do believe that whether he intended this or not, a lot of his statements about Islam could be more readily used to dehumanize Muslims than they are to reform Islam, which is a ridiculous idea anyway, for any Westerner to undertake especially.
I have Jeffrey Dahmer's sweater.
Like I said before, it is fine to acknowledge the profound regressive elements of other cultures. Not to acknowledge them is in and of itself a little bit patronizing. However, I do think he went off of a deep end in many ways, and I think it's fine for people to dislike Dirty Harris. It's fine if you're not feeling the Harris. It's completely fine. But in the case of Oliver here, I do think that he shits at him and he will proceed to shit on him in ways that are basically intellectually dishonest, to use Sam Harris's language. As a fucking YouTube philosopher, he should really do a better job, man.
Interestingly, this criticism is similar to one put forward by another thinker, Jordan Peterson. He and Harris agree on an awful lot, but one thing Peterson has pointed out is that there are so many facts in the realm of objective science that you need some story to help you pick and choose which facts will be relevant. Philosophers would call that story an ideology.
Only a YouTube philosopher would call something like that an ideology. An ideology is a set of idea. What Peterson means by a story is some sort of a cultural narrative shared by a group of people that gives them a sense of cohesion and morality and meaning. So, for example, Peterson professes himself to be some sort of a Christian, and yet he will not explicitly acknowledge the divinity of Christ. You can't fucking call that a coherent ideology. It's just that he is committed to Christ as a sort of a guiding archetypes that's almost in our cultural DNA. and that we risk something from separating ourselves from the archetypal Jesus. We risk it, and Peterson doesn't want us to take the risk.
But that's not a word Peterson likes, and he has his own ideas, which we'll get to. Even more interestingly, Harris's idea is an accidental rip-off of a theory developed by philosopher Richard Boyd in 1982 called The Homeostatic Cluster Property Theory of Metaethical Naturalism. Sexy title. Boyd thought that words like good and evil refer to real properties out there in the material world, and that therefore statements like murder is bad are capable of being objectively true, or at least true in the same way as scientific statements are, which prompts the question, to what exactly do these words refer? Boyd's answer is that they are cluster properties, groups of things that tend to go together. The example he uses is actually the same one Harris does. Health. There are all kinds of things that we would want to include in a definition of the word healthy, like your heart should be beating and you should be able to breathe. But do you have to be a certain size in order to be healthy? Do you have to not be in pain? Can you have a beating heart and be unhealthy? There's a cluster of properties here somewhere that makes up the definition of the word health, but we're never going to pin down a definite list because that's just not how the concept works.
So I have to confess that Sugar Tits went a little bit meta on me here with this whole segment. I don't know what the fuck he's talking about. Because on the one hand, he said that Sam Harris's theory is an accidental ripoff of this theory, which I will explain later it isn't. And then he proceeds to give this example about health. I'm pretty certain that Sam Harris wouldn't endorse it, in which case this whole segment is pretty meaningless. I mean, if this theory contradicts Sam Harris, then he didn't rip it off, did he? Whereas I very much doubt that Sam Harris doesn't believe that there is an objective definition of health. A person is unhealthy when they have a physical condition that is bringing them closer to death, that will cause death. It's just as simple as that. And then there is disability that prevents you from functioning on the level of a normal person in your age bracket. This works for all kinds of diseases, even major psychiatric diseases like bipolar disorder or schizophrenia, because people with those conditions are brought closer to death because they on average have a lower life expectancy. So to say that health of all things is somehow a subjective thing is idiotic. It's just stupid, and I have no fucking idea why he did this.
Despite that vagueness, though, it's still very obviously useful and meaningful. Similarly, Boyd thinks that a word like good refers to a cluster of things that are non-morally good for humans, like sharing friendship, sharing love, having fun, watching quality YouTube videos. But just like with health, you're never going to be able to pin down a full list because the concept just isn't like that. And here's the big takeaway. If we say John is healthy, we could be talking about any number of things in the cluster of health. Whether he has a disease, whether he works out, whether he has a good relationship with his mother, all of which are objective, but whether the sentence John is healthy is true will still depend on what aspect of his health we're talking about.
If you were to phone up Oliver and say, hey, your mother is really unhealthy right now, you need to come urgently, in his mind, it would equally mean potentially that she might just have a deteriorating relationship with him and she might be mad. Their relationship is unhealthy because he's the type of a piece of shit who can't distinguish a metaphor from the literal definition of the word.
It will still be relative to the context in which we are saying it. So this relative objective binary that people like Peterson and Harris are working with is an oversimplification. The theory Boyd defends is called moral naturalism. It's about as objective as ethical theories get. But statements about morality will still be true or false relative to the context in which we use them. Objectivity and relativity can go together.
I don't like the fact that he's naked, borderline naked. I don't like that. I don't like male nudity. I don't like how self-satisfied he is. And I also don't like the fact that this is all bullshit. Let's take somebody like Rationality rules. I have offered constructive criticism of him on numerous occasions.
But, despite the fact that I quite enjoy a lot of Molyneux's work,
But when Rationality rules as goofy as his channel is, when he criticizes somebody, you have a general idea of what that other person believes, that Rationality rules is not debunked, you know. You have an idea of what's being debunked. Whereas here with Sam Harris, there's just a series of like fucking self-satisfied hand gestures and other shit that it forces me to summarize Sam Harris's moral theory. And it goes a little bit like this. If we agree that we collectively should strive to have moral beliefs and structures that benefit all conscious beings, then after we have agreed to this collectively, then there are different objective ways of achieving it. Not one objective ways, but different ways. And this is where science enters into the equation with the brain scans and whatever. And this is where people who have been disengaged from moral discourse, who have not used their brain power in this direction, can do this. So it's not an unintentional plagiarism of this theory about clusters, which in and of themselves more remind me of archetypes. Now, of course, I can't trust Oliver to summarize a philosophical theory correctly, but it seems like those clusters become real because of their relationship with the people. And so there could potentially be different clusters in different cultures, which Sam Harris would then want to invalidate.
Language seems to be really important here. When you're talking about the veil, you're talking about women dressed in cloth bags. You know, I've lived in the Muslim world, spoken with a lot of Muslim women, and some of them would say something else. They would say, no, you know, this is a celebration of female specialness. It helps build that, and it's an expression, it's a result of the fact that, and this is arguably a sophisticated psychological view, that male lust is not to be trusted.
Right.
I mean, can you engage in a conversation with that kind of woman without seeing kind of cultural imperialist?
Yeah, well, I think this is, I tried to broach this in a sentence watching the clock ticking, but the question is, what is voluntary in a context where men have certain expectations and certain, and you're guaranteed to be treated in a certain way if you don't veil yourself. And so if anyone in this room wanted to wear a veil or a very funny hat or tattoo their faces, or I mean, I think we should be free to voluntarily do whatever we want, but we have to be honest about the constraints that these women are placed under. And so I think we shouldn't be so eager to always take their word for it, especially in, you know, when it's 120 degrees out and you're wearing a full burqa.
So Harris has allowed himself the possibility of saying, I know what's good for you, and I don't necessarily need to ask.
And so it's just a different theory, and it's just consequentialism. And if you're going to talk about Sam Harris and shit on him, go ahead and please do. But it seems like the consequentialism, that just basically the old idea that Sam Harris has just rebranded, should be part of that discussion, but it really isn't. And you have no idea, no coherent idea of what Oliver is disputing with such fucking vigor of a moron.
We've seen that attempts to find objective meaning in life through science can get pretty complicated pretty fast, which might be a problem if that meaning is something you're expected to kill for. Turns out getting rid of subjectivity isn't so easy after all.
Like, why is this guy so fucking happy with himself? Like, what is the secret sauce? Is it the rented snake? Is it decorations that look like some sort of a shitty theater production from junior high? What is it? Like, is it repeating subjectivity again? I don't understand. Like, what's the secret here? What is the... I resent the whole thing. I resent the whole thing.
Peterson has an interesting relationship with subjectivity. He thinks there are two worlds, the world of the objective and the world of experience. And that it's the world of experience with things like pain and hunger and stories that people really care about. It is such things, experienced personally, that are the most fundamental elements of human life from the archaic dramatic perspective. And they are not easily reducible to detached and objective. You're not objective. You're alive. You're subjective.
So when the lobster himself perfectly echoes what you've been saying for the whole video, maybe this is a time to put on a garment and look in the mirror and really examine what the fuck is going on in your life that you got yourself to this point.
Just as the objective world has atoms and fundamental particles, Peterson thinks that the experiential world too has its fundamental elements, the dichotomy for which he is famous: order and chaos. Chaos is the domain of ignorance itself. It's the foreigner, the stranger, the member of another gang, the rustle in the bushes at nighttime. Chaos is also the formless potential from which the God of Genesis 1 called forth order using language at the beginning of time. And chaos is freedom. Order, by contrast, is explored territory. Order is tribe, religion, hearth, home, and country. It's the warm, secure living room where the fireplace glows and the children play. But order is sometimes tyranny. So here we see that Peterson thinks order and chaos can manifest in different ways at different times. No great problem there. But in that talk I showed you, Peterson gives two examples of order: the walls of the city and the uniform of the police. But there are those for whom walls and borders are more representative of chaos. If you've ever travelled internationally, you'll know that crossing the border is a moment when the unknown and uncertainty and anxiety can confront you. And of course there are many people for whom the uniform of the police is a symbol of terror.
Are we talking about black people? Well, of course, terror is in no way an antithesis of order. Like, there was a white supremacist order in the United States, and if it didn't exist, then all the current discussion about racism would be void. What was Martin Luther King objecting to? Was he objecting to white chaos? So I hate to defend Peterson himself, but he said that order could be tyrannical. A person in uniform, a police officer, whatever, they always represent some sort of an order. They might fail to achieve that order. The order they represent could be entirely hideous, but that's what they represent. They represent an attempt of order, an attempt of establishing hierarchy and power. It could be corrupt power, it could be whatever. If the communists would have lost the Civil War, their secret police, the Cheka, all these battalions, they would still represent an order during their existence. It would just be an attempt at establishing order that actually failed. So they do fucking always represent order. And if there wasn't an objective reality to white supremacist order in America, then the fucking claims of racism, they would all be void. So let's commit to order, my dude.
So can the same thing be both order and chaos at the same time? If the answer is no, and there really are objective properties, then it seems like Peterson needs to answer questions like, what are they, and what are they made of? From his books and his conversations with Harris, it seems like he'd rather say these are features of subjective experience. So yes, two people could experience the same thing, one as order and one as chaos, just as two people could experience the same work of art differently. But if that's the case, then order and chaos are relative. Not just statements about them either, but the properties themselves. Although he's trying to escape it, relativity is actually built right into the heart of Peterson's entire worldview. There's a big tension here between somebody who rails against relativism on the one hand, but places subjectivity and contextual understanding at the heart of most of what he does on the other.
I certainly wish that the Lord of Soiferno wouldn't be so happy with himself about refuting Peterson. After all, we're talking about the same guy who said that we should straighten our posture because we're related to lobsters. Like, this is the guy you're fucking refuting, and if you've been successful in whatever way, then there's no real reason. Like, there is no celebration here. Stop acting like a fucking girl who has developed over the summer, looking for those lustful glances, dude. Grow the fuck up. This is not a fucking achievement shitting on Peterson. Anybody fucking can do it. Fucking asshole. Okay, well, the other thing is that Peterson's view as it pertains to archetypes and all that shit, I don't even know what the fuck we're talking about. Motherfucker, I took a shot of antifreeze every time this fucker said fucking subjective, and now I'm about to die, and I'm really happy about it. Peterson is not subjectively wrong, whatever. He's not subjective and wrong. He's objective and objectively wrong, okay? He has objective evidence for his stupid theory. Like, one of the big names for Peterson is Dostoevsky. Of course, Dostoevsky, what did he say? He said, if there is no God, then everything is allowed. Now, I don't know what Dostoevsky meant for it, but the way Peterson takes it is that there was this archetype in the DNA of the people, interconnected. It was goofy, it was dark, it was irrational at times, but this was the anchor into morality, an anchor into the humanity as we understood it. And then if you move away from that, the demons will come. So this is an objective worldview. Peterson can say, look at the Russian Empire, it was backwards, there's shit going on with it, but it was connected with the archetypes. And when this was abandoned, look what happened, and the Red Terror, etc. So these are two pieces of evidence that Peterson has. Now, of course, it didn't happen that in Russia, my ancestors decided to say fuck God one of those days and then took out their balls and start shaking them around saying, let's give the archetype some air. They didn't fucking wave two in the air, they just don't care, giving a big fuck you to the Virgin Mary. That didn't happen. There was a series of disasters, economic collapse, Tsar who didn't want to introduce basic democratic reform, and everything collapsed. But there were reasons for it other than the fall of the archetypes that, in any case, fuck it, nobody gave a shit about. But the bottom line is, if you want to have a fucking philosophy tube channel, then fucking saying, everything is subjective, you gotta do fucking better, dude. You gotta, maybe you don't, because you have more views.
One of those fake Jordan Peterson fans might say he's not really a relativist. He's a pragmatist. He's not trying to defend a philosophical theory, he's trying to help people. There's that whole bit in chapter 9 about how it's good to order your life based on some principles, whether it's Freud, Jung, religion, or whatever. The point is to avoid nihilism. But I think it's a stretch to say that Peterson would consider any ordered life to be as good as any other. It definitely seems like he thinks some interpretations of order and chaos are more on the money than others, which again is in deep tension with their relativistic nature. Peterson, I'm sure, would say that order and chaos are evolved into the structure of your human brains. According to him, your ancestors learned that some behaviors were advantageous, and they unconsciously developed rules for those behaviors, which we can come to be consciously aware of through the telling of stories. That's why he thinks stories and tradition are so important. So it's not 100% relative. It's grounded in people's experiences, but it's still objectively biological. This is quite similar to an idea developed by Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung, one of Peterson's major inspirations, who proposed the existence of a collective unconscious to explain similarities that he observed between his patients. Peterson came up with his version to explain similarities that he observed in the different fields he studied for maps of meaning. But anything is similar to anything if you look hard enough. Lions are similar to lingerie in that they're both made of atoms.
For the longest time I've noticed that the elephant trunk has a really kind of a significant resemblance to my uncircumcised penis, uncircumcised in the USSR. That's not a Beatles song. But anyway, after this video, I don't even know what a foreskin even is. I don't even know. Somebody call a rabbi, everything is so subjective.
Judging two things to be similar in a way that matters, though, is subjective and relative to the context. As a zookeeper once said to me, lions are similar to lingerie in that they're both made of atoms, but this is the lion enclosure of the Central Park Zoo, so will you and your girlfriend please leave? Take these two images. One is a 19th century painting by Italian artist Roberto Ferruzzi showing the Virgin Mary and Jesus, and the other is a vase from the 5th century BC showing the goddess Demeter, her daughter Persephone, and the man Triptolemus being given some wheat. I might say, I think there are similarities between these. They're both images of women, mothers, symbols of new life. But they're also different in many ways. They come from very different cultures and times and are made of different materials. To say, I think there are similarities here that are relevant relative to certain contexts, is a statement that forefronts a subjective judgment. I think there are similarities that I am telling you about for some reason that I have. But if I say, Mary and Demeter are both instances of the archetype of the Great Mother, which exists in the collective unconscious, then it sounds like I'm being objective. 12 Rules for Life is full of this. What philosophers call reification, making something into a thing. From hierarchies to archetypes, Peterson uses objective-sounding language when really what he's doing is subjectively drawing comparisons for his own reasons. And as the only true Jordan Peterson fan in the world, I don't have a problem with that, but it does mean that all his psychology still can't get him out of relativism. By the standard he sets himself. his attempt to find meaning in life fails. None of this, by the way, is me claiming that science is all subjective or that reality doesn't exist. Maybe there really is a collective unconscious. Maybe you have similar brains and therefore tend to think in similar ways. But the point is that the subjective and the objective are not so easily crowbarred apart.
Hey Oliver, I crowbarred your mom apart. Ho! Alright guys, well, maybe I will say something substantive in the remainder of this video. Maybe I won't. I guess you have nothing better to do with your life but watch this shit.
Which is why questions like, who gets to write the stories? Who gets to decide what represents order and what represents chaos? Are important. And don't look now, but it looks like we're heading into. Well, bugger me blue, it looks like life really is meaningless after all. Whether we try to find objective value through brain scans or Petersonism or whatever Stefan Molyneux's peddling, it looks like we can't escape the quicksand of relativism and subjectivism. We could give religion another go, but that just seems like a lot of work. Also, it has its own philosophical problems, which are pretty well trodden. I just want to have fun. Is there any philosophy that's about having fun? Well, there is one idea. Although it's a little bit controversial. Maybe you've heard of it. It's called, try and fucking enjoy yourself. Hedonism is like snakes. It has a nasty reputation, but it's actually quite sweet. It's associated with vice and frivolous enjoyment, social media and seeking pleasure outside of the light of Christ. But when philosophers talk about pleasure, they don't just mean the cheap and easy thrills. Pleasure can mean any mental state that is desired. That means that we can still talk about somebody experiencing pleasure, even if they are physically in pain. And yes, there are some pleasures that, if overindulged in, might lessen your pleasure in the long run. Heroin and infidelity, to name just two components of my typical Friday night. I once spent an entire Sunday in a bathtub coming down from getting absurdly high on MDMA.
My friends, did you hear that for his next video, he's actually gonna put a smiley face around his asshole and spread his cheeks, and then there's gonna be a talking thing, and it's gonna be everything is subjective because you don't everything. It's all relative, man. Yeah, it's gonna be like that, and then there's gonna be also a pet store snake, and which one is and how is it gonna fit into the whole kind of subjective schema, the postmodern, the technical definition of postmodernism. How is this the snake, the reptile, the alleged reptile, depending on things? How is it gonna fit in, my friends? I'm not gonna stick around. I have seen enough of Oliver's flesh. I'm heading on a one-way ticket on the train to Emo Town. I'll catch you later.
And it was one of the bleakest periods of my life because my brain wouldn't make any more of the happy juice. And now I don't do MDMA anymore because it's a whole lot of pleasure in one go, but it limits the pleasure over my whole life. And a general attempt to maximize pleasure over your lifetime could lead to a pretty meaningful existence. And if you don't want to think of it as hedonism, think of it as maximizing your own rational self-interest with respect to happiness. You can be a hedonist and still reflect on why you want what you want.
And what I want, Oliver, is rape. That's kind of what I want. I find the word no coming off of ladies' lips to be very subjective, very kind of relativistic to the situation. Things, okay. Well, you see, like, Peterson and Harris, in their own clumsy ways, have laid out some theories about ethics or some sort of standards for behavior in one way or another. So I'm more sympathetic to consequentialism, of course, than to Peterson's archetypal Jesus, but nevertheless, they put something out there. And what do I hear from Oliver? I do drugs, I'm so fucking edgy. Oliver, such an edgy white boy. Go ahead and fucking DM him, ladies, on Twitter. Maybe he's receptive to these things. You know, he's just such a fucking hedonist. You think he's a little nerd, but he does drugs and shit. Well, anyway, I just think that at the end of the day, when you hear liberals or leftists talk about ethics, they're talking about consequentialism. And if we're going to shit on Harris relative to this theory, which you may or may not support, and just forget about his tickle torture shit, but just the theory in isolation, like, it would be nice to have an alternative. I like big clumsy theories like that. I like them. I think they're useful to discuss.
Still, pay attention to your own thoughts, as Peterson might put it. It's not about being a slave to your passions all the time. By choosing to get off the Mandy, I'm sacrificing small pleasures now for greater pleasure overall, which is something that Peterson also places a lot of emphasis on. Believe me, hedonism is entirely consistent with delayed gratification. A philosophy of life that tells people to ignore pleasure just isn't going to go anywhere. That's why I'm not so hot on most major religions. Even Peterson, with all of his life is suffering rhetoric, knows this. The final rule in 12 Rules for Life is pet a cat when you encounter one on the street. And what is that if not an invitation to take pleasure in the little things when you find them? And one of the objections to hedonism is that you could lead a very pleasurable life, but a very immoral one. Camus may also have had a personal investment in the character of Don Juan. In 1959, he wrote a letter containing the sentence, "This frightful separation will at least bring home to us more than ever the constant need we have for each other. I await you full of strength and passion."
Is Oliver a rapist? My friends, the answer is yes, of course. I'll leave you with this. Advertising hedonism is kind of like talking about your own depression to others. You kind of have to be an interesting person to pull it off.